Great to see you. Here we are, Jill and Imogen from 16 Style Types, doing our regular monthly Facebook Live, talking about each of the 16 style types. And today we're going to chat to you a little bit about ISTP, the individualistic stylist, the style maverick, and their particular approach to style and what makes their style work for them, some of the stumbling blocks they might face on their journey to authentic style, and what they can teach us, the rest of us, the other 15 style types, about style. Our basic principle is that each of the 16 style types brings something unique and wonderful into the style space, and something that makes style work for them. And when they understand that, style makes sense in a way that it never has before, sometimes for the first time ever. And also that we can all take something from those 16 individual approaches to style. And I certainly know from living with someone with ISTP preferences that you can learn a lot from their approach to many things in life, but certainly their approach to style falls within the boundaries of what it is like to be an ISTP.
Yes. So we call this one the individualist stylist and the style maverick. So let's talk about those names, because I think that's something that's always quite interesting about how we came up with them.
Yes, indeed. Individualistic really relates to how independent and pragmatically minded they are, that they really, ISTPs are problem-solving machines. And so they really have a fairly autonomous way of approaching things. They're generally not checking in with other people too much about their approaches to things. Certainly when it comes to the definition of problems, that's where they really do tend to be masters. And the maverick thing is about walking to the beat of their own style drum. I'll never forget our style news for ISTP was very much a don't get in my face about this. You know, I don't want to be told. I don't want to be managed. And I certainly don't want to be pushed. And none of us, of course, like to be pushed, but some of us are more open to persuasion than others. And this is one of the style types that very much resists any form of that. And so they tend to find that when they want to embrace style, that they will be proactive about it. They will be selective in who they ask to be provide guidance to them when it comes to style. So if you're not asked by someone who has a preference for ISTP, I would in general caution against offering unsolicited opinions, because they won't want them. And if they do want them, they'll ask you. And so even if, you know, you believe you are, or you know you are incredibly stylish and have something to contribute, this is one of the style types I would just hold back on providing too much in that unsolicited style category.
Yes. Look, I think there's many types too who don't appreciate unsolicited advice. So they're not the only one who doesn't like, you know, and it's something that I'm as very careful as an image consultant that I don't offer unsolicited advice. You know, if people don't ask me, I'm not telling you anything, because I want to, you know, like, you know, because you might be affronted by it. You might, or it could push you the other way. And I would suspect with the ISTP might, if you start offering the advice, they might go, well, I'm just going to do the opposite.
They can be contrary in that regard. Yeah, so that is true. I personally love unsolicited style advice. So, you know, I say these things that I know that it's true, but it isn't my, I mean, hopefully a lot of the unsolicited style advice I get is either of a positive nature or couched in a way that is meant to be helpful. So it's always interesting, you know, when we meet people whose approaches are just completely opposite to our own.
Yes, the total opposite. And this is what they've got, that little maverick about them. They're a little bit different. They're individualistic. They're not going to dress in a way. They're certainly not going to be following the latest fad or fashion for the sake of it. No. Their style will very much be their own, but they do have an incredible practical bent, don't they? I mean, that's one of the things I think about the ISTP is like massively practical people.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. If it doesn't work, it's out. And this can often translate into things like physical comfort. Things must physically feel comfortable in terms of how fabrics feel on them, the fit of things, if things are too loose or too tight. It might be tags that scratch, you know, things that are too short or too long on the arm, shoes that, you know, are uncomfortable. Sometimes they'll just take a set against something. They just don't like a colour or a particular style of pants, or whatever it is. And there is no convincing them. It wouldn't matter if that was the most flattering item of clothing they could ever possibly put on their body. If they've taken a set against it, then you will have an uphill battle trying to convince them of things. They can become intractable when they've decided something.
Yes. And I think too, I mean,
Excuse me.
ISTP clients, she was like, you know, there could be no extraneous stuff, no extraneous detail on her clothes. Like she had one top that had a bit of a, you know, big sleeve, and it just flaps, it gets in the way. It's not practical. If you can't eat soup with it, you know,
the soup eating test. There you go. There's something we can all take away. The soup eating test.
Yeah. If you're going to get your sleeves in your soup, do you really want to wear it? Now, for sometimes they don't mind, but certainly for that practical bent. So if you have this practical bent, I know the ISTJ is quite similar in that way. They've got quite a practical bent about their clothes. But yeah, it's got to be practical and comfortable, and they are the two probably top criteria in many ways. Because if it doesn't fit that criteria, forget about the rest of it.
This is true. The two IS blank P, so ISFP, ISTP, they do have this element of whimsy, novelty, things that are a little bit different. I think the ISTPs are probably the most likely to wear a shirt that says it's got to be 5 o'clock somewhere. So they can have this sort of sense of the playful and the sense of the bordering on the absurd, not actually in the absurd, but nudging up to it. So this is where the idea that they like to wear things that are non-mainstream or things that have some element of novelty to them. They like things to be a little bit interesting. And this is that SP combination, that sense of spontaneous problem solving. And you put the T in there and they have that very sort of practical, logical, objective bent to it. And so you will often see something quite quirky, something a little unexpected in an ISTP style. And our style muse talked about how she'd been given a long duster style of item that was a sort of a one-off from an artisan in some remote community that a friend had given to her, and it became her thing. She was a facilitator, and she wore it as her sort of signature thing, and people knew her by, she had one. If it was me, I would have, sought out the artist and bought all 11 versions of it. But, one was enough. And, and she really loved the fact that it was unique and nobody else would have one. And, yeah.
And interestingly, she probably would have worked with her Doc Martens as well.
Probably, yeah. In fact, she might have said that.
Yeah. It was there was the thing I remember when I was reading the interview that you did with her was very much about, there was a quiet rebellion. So it might not be overtly rebellious clothes, though of course there is this not towing the line to convention. I think that's very ISTP, but it was this kind of underlying feel of nobody can tell me what to do.
Yeah.
But it wasn't necessarily really overt in that I will wear very rebellious style clothes. Now I'm sure that some ISTPs do wear some of that, but it was interesting that was definitely an attitude of rebellion came through.
Totally. So not rule followers. This is one of the things that distinguishes them from ISTJs in that regard. So their relationship to the rules can often be non-existent. So they don't recognize them. They don't need them. Where they come into subscribing to, say, style guidelines is because it furthers a goal that is important to them. But they, and this is the introvert part, is they're not looking for the relationship to the other to confirm self. So that comes internally. So this comes down to their approach to many things, hobbies and relationships and careers and all kinds of things. But certainly when it comes to style, they're not looking to fit in. They're not looking to stand out. The phrase that was used that was really, really good is, I want to knock people's socks off gently. And I thought that was a really telling phrase for ISTP. So, definitely their own people. And this does distinguish them from several other style types where the relationship to the other is incredibly important, is paramount, defines how they approach style. Not so when it comes to ISTPs.
One of the things that they are most likely to is actually to not give a hoot, in their words. And actually about fashion or style. And I think a lot of that's about fashion trends. It's about, I don't care what's in, I don't care what's out, you know, because it's that individualistic aspect. And also they might have quite a minimalist wardrobe. I know, having worked with ISTPs, it's, yeah, I want to know what works, and I'll have, you know, and they are likely to go, I want to buy 3 of that top, because when one wears out, I know I'm going to want another one. Yeah. And I don't need the variety that some types, like, you know, your type needs variety, my type needs variety for different reasons. Less likely to need the variety, aren't they?
Absolutely. And we term the phrase, or use the phrase, an inch wide and a mile deep, because they can often have wardrobes that look like a bunch of repeats. But what that does is provides them with their own version of variety. This is why a term like variety can be really misleading, because all of us have a need for variety, but what it translates into is wildly different things. And you and I have had this conversation on Inside Out Style blog quite a few times about we both need it, but it looks really, really different for you than it does for me. And for an ISTP, they often like to have quite a few of the thing that they've chosen, but they look very similar to, you know, to an outsider, but that provides them with the sense of variety. And so from that perspective, they can actually have wardrobes of varying size. You know, some style types we would feel fairly comfortable saying they're probably going to lean on the minimalist size. ISTPs, I would expect more variety. You could go into 100 different wardrobes of people with ISTP. Presumably you could find 100 ISTPs that interested in style. And I suspect they would all have significant things that made them different to one another.
Yeah. But one of the problems when you've got that inch wide, mile deep is you can get stuck in a time warp.
Yeah.
You know, you can get quite dated. And that's one of those things I think I've seen with some ISTPs where you just go, you know, it's, you know, it was great in 1985, but it's like we've moved on.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. You know, the frames of glasses can change, and sure, you don't want to be necessarily changing them every year or 18 months or even every 5 years, but you know, you want to look at those kinds of things, particularly if you are still at work, you're in a field of work where you are influencing people, which of course we're all influencing people one way or another, but those are the kinds of external check-ins that can be particularly helpful for some style types, and ISTP is right at the top of the list to say, I need to remind myself to check in that this is still working for me, for the goals that are important to me.
Yeah. So, you know, it's always important to remember to do these things, isn't it? And to check up just that, even things like, I mean, I know one who was like wearing, you know, a jacket. It was just a black classic jacket, but I looked at it and went, it's just very dated. Like the whole feel of the style of this jacket was the size of the shoulder pads. Yeah. It was the buttons on it, all those like little details that often kind of tell of the era where something came from. And it was like, and she was an older lady as well. And it really, so what happens is when an older person is wearing an old garment, it looks really old fashioned, versus young people can wear the kind of grandma clothes and get away with it because
it looks still a bit vintage and retro when like you've made it. Yeah.
And even though it may be vintage still, it just looks old fashioned, a bit stuck in a time warp when it's on someone older. So it is one of those things that even when we've got those kind of tried and trusted kind of clothes, particularly if we've bought multiples because we've gone, I just love this stuff, and so I'm going to have enough of these to last me for 30 years. It's something just to be a little bit wary of as well.
Yeah, absolutely. No doubt about that.
Yes. So some of their strengths is they will dress to be suiting the situation, you know, what the environment is, and all those sorts of things. Like these things will come in, but they will be definitely doing it with their own twists.
Yeah, all 4 of the SP types are particularly attuned to the physical environment. And of course, their attention to that varies from person to person and from each of those 4 types, depending on what's important to them. And ISTPs in general tend to have a relationship to the physical, or they tend to either be sporty or they're particularly physically dexterous in some kind of way, not in all ways. And this is where it, you know, you can look at one aspect and you know, that they're not as dexterous as they are in another context, but certainly their awareness of what their environment requires of them is very, very important to them. And this is not true of all style types, but they just have sort of this sixth sense about it, and what's going to be required for that situation. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. One of the things that our muse described was she liked nifty pieces. I love that as a word.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, found in boutiques and bazaars and out of the way places. So as much as they may not want to be the most out there dresses, like, so not like some of, say, our more creative style types who like to dress in the more very unique, but they certainly don't want to look like they're from the same high street or, you know, chain store that everybody else is wearing either, aren't they?
Absolutely. There's that individualistic thing that's coming through. They very much enjoy in the way that they enjoy it. It's not an attention grabbing way, but there's something about the way that they present themselves. And this includes the way that they communicate, the way that they interact. And this is where knowing this helps you to align your style type. You want your style to be as interesting as you are. And ISTPs are very interesting people. Their approaches to things, it's always this wonderful combination of the S and the P. And I think sometimes we often do the stereotypical thing of thinking, well, if they're detailed, they've also got to be methodical. Well, that's true if it's SJ. But when you put a P at the end of the style type, you get a completely different version of sensing. And it's that spontaneous in the moment, responding to what's happening now. And it's often not methodical. They're not attendant to time and task in the same way that we can often associate with SJs. And so this, when it applied to style, always gives them a bit of an edge.
Yes. And I think it's that, you know, like James Bond is the ultimate ISTP, you know, hero, isn't he?
Absolutely.
And he's always dressed right for the occasion. He's got his tux on when he's in the casino or the fancy party. And then he's, you know, probably got a pair of chinos and a shirt on when he's rolling around in the dust, you know, fighting some baddie.
Well, see, as an ISTP, James Bond is sort of the ultimate stereotype in that regard. Now, he has a very singular look. Now, you could look at that and say, but I hate tuxedos or anything that's formal. Correct. We are not saying that an ISTP dresses in a tuxedo. We're saying that the approach to style is very singular. And very unique and very suited to that individual. Now, James Bond is a caricature, of course, but as you know, a model for being able to sort of a scaffolding for being able to understand the process, if not the specifics of it, it's a really interesting case study. And I think other ISTPs could look at that and say, well, what do I need to take out of, you know, understanding this stereotype of my type? And apply it. And, you know, James Bond is really clear on what, you know, James Bond wears. And there is not a lot of variation, even in swim trunks. You know, the man can be holding a martini and it's like it goes. It's totally congruent.
Oh, gotta love a bit of James Bond style.
Absolutely. And, you know, James Bond does not have a sidekick. James Bond is very much walking to the beat. He knows what is right and what is wrong. Even when he gets, you know, called over, you know, hauled over the coals by M, he's not recalcitrant, you know, because he knows. He's absolutely rock solid within himself about what's right and what's wrong. And, you know, these are some of the characteristics that we look for. And we see these in ISTPs. And of course, the hurdle that they come up against is in relationship to other people who see things differently and approach things differently, because ISTPs are one of the types that will just pronounce things are wrong. You know, they can be very blunt in their communication.
He gets into trouble sometimes, doesn't he? Because he won't always toe the line in the way that an SJ would toe the line. So an SJ would be horrified if M had to pull them up.
Yes, exactly, because they have broken established rules and norms and all of those kinds of things. But I mean, an ISTP is just as likely to say you're wrong, Em, and walk out, you know, because maintaining any sense of harmonious, you know, cohesion with another person is, you know, not a strong value.
It's interesting, isn't it? One of the things they may do, it was one of their challenge areas, may be to not prioritize style in a way because they're so focused on doing things. They're very much doers, aren't they? Like doing is, and I think I think one of my other clients that I would suspect would have been an ISTP was a chiropractor. Very much a doing job, out there fixing people, helping people, setting up this business. She was young. And I got to her wardrobe. She said, I want you to come in and tell me, like I'm having trouble putting things together. And honestly, everything in her wardrobe was worn out.
Right.
Because she was so busy doing this other stuff that her style had just slipped right to the back burner. Yeah. And honestly, there were things with holes in them. I'm going, you can't see clients wearing clothes with holes in them. This was fairly dire. But it can be so focused on the doing other things that slips off.
I think there's a bit of a continuum from I never have to be reminded about style because it's a part of my daily life. I love it. It's a passion. It's a joy. Sometimes it's the best part of my day, through to I have to remember that clothing wears out and I can be wearing something with a hole for years before I even realize it. And of course, there's every point on that continuum. And ISTPs are much generally further down this end of the spectrum, unless they happen to choose style or something aesthetic as their work. And so they are one of the style types that would benefit from calendaring things like get a wardrobe review with a professional image consultant, or, my sister or best friend or somebody who, is into this stuff. Schedule this kind of stuff, because they're not scheduling by nature. They're preparers, not planners. Really, really different distinction. And so this is where putting into place, they are systems thinkers. So use that, systems thinking approach, overlay that onto your style in a way that makes sense to you. And something like diarising. Every 9 months or 12 months, you're going to have a wardrobe review with somebody trusted who's going to tell you the truth and then help you to fill in wardrobe gaps. These can be a really helpful thing to this style type. Personally, I never need to diarise things like that. Style is like, it's like a catcher's mitt.
It's just daily.
That's right. It's a filter
daily
through
gift to yourself and the world.
That's right. It's a filter through which I see everything, constantly. But we're all different in that regard.
And in some ways, they're much more like the INTP. So I think the TP part here and the ITP is I'm not noticing so much too that they are more likely to say, I don't judge other people by what they're wearing.
Absolutely.
In a way, the INTP is also very likely to say that as well. And they are the ones who are probably the least likely to judge people about what they're wearing, because it's not a high value for them in a way. And because it's this practical doing, some of that sort of stuff takes over. So they're just not in the space of judging. So they're not noticing, like they may not even remember to get out of their own pajamas, rather than, and like, oh, I need to get dressed. I need to, that stuff kind of falls by the wayside. I think I have a friend who does things like have come back from somewhere and she's wearing a nice clothes and then she starts noticing there's a few weeds in the front garden. So she immediately puts the heels on and the skirt and she starts weeding the garden. And it's that kind of like, most of us would go, I just need to go inside and get changed and, out of my good clothes. But it's that immediate, let's get into action element that can happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that thing about judging. The observing piece can be interesting as well. SPs in general tend to be wonderful observers. And so they can notice things about someone's physicality. And it might be to do with posture. It might be to do with their clothing or their hairstyle, but because they are astute observers of things in the physical world, they can pick up on things that are happening with others, and perhaps just not be applying that same degree of observation to themselves. And that judgment piece, that decision-making piece, is often where they can need a little bit more structure and a little bit more that strategic approach just to overlay. It's not natural to them, but bring that in so that it helps you get where you're going and continue to get where you're going.
I would suspect there's very few ISTP image consultants in the world.
I would go along with that. I mean, until we, profile every image consultant, we'll never know. But as a general thing, it doesn't seem to be the kind of work that would appeal to someone with these particular kinds of personality preferences. That said, of course, we can all do anything that we set our minds to. So we have to say these riders so, you know, people don't get
even
up
though
in
it's
arms.
a doing job, you know, in many ways it's a doing job, but it's still, it's in, when I just having done, you know, workshops at conferences where we've got 100 image consultants in the room, the ST table is pretty tight, like, you know, and they're more likely to be STJs than STPs.
Yes. Well, you know, image consulting is an environment where there are a lot of established norms and guidelines and ways of doing things, even systems like color systems or body shape systems, you know, so having a natural bent towards those and let's follow those rules, if we can use that terminology, certainly appeals more than to an individualistic approach, which is don't tell me what to do, how to think, or what to wear, which kind of sums it up, really.
So, you know, there we go. There's some ISTP. So if you're ISTP or happen to have one in your life, because sometimes too, it's that I've got one in my life and I can't get them to wear the thing, like we're going to a party. Because it's often at those experiences, isn't it? And you being married to one, it's like we're going out somewhere, maybe you can put something different on. You know, like,
yeah, exactly. I have learned the hard way that sometimes I'll go through it, like he'll get dressed and I'll think, no, I wouldn't wear that. And then I'll think, no, I shouldn't say anything. And then then, you know, we're further along the track. It'll be an hour later and I think I am going to say something and it's too late. And that really, really is like, you should have told me when I had a chance, like to change, you know, from my beige on beige. So, yes, it can be tricky.
Yeah, I think my ex-husband was ISTP, and there were certainly times where we'd be going out to some party or event and I'd have to go, please, can you put this, like just a collared shirt on, you know, like sometimes it's just wear a bit of this or that.
The thing is, when an ISTP does decide that style is important, they will prioritize it in their own way. So it will come up from, you know, negative whatever up to somewhere on the priority, you know, poll. And that includes, you know, having respect for the person who's given that advice and all those kinds of things. They will factor that in. It will always have an individualistic bent to it. But, you know, that's sort of one of the first hurdles is this stuff actually makes a difference. It's going to help me in some way with something practical in my real life. And so once that hurdle has been reached, then they can get on board with it. But I even noticed this in our beta testing. When we beta tested our online program, we had 20 women, one of each of the style types and a couple of double ups. And we only had one ISTP, which I thought was incredible that we even had one ISTP. And she was a wonderful contributor, but she contributed one of the least to the Facebook group. And, you know, we kept in contact and, you know, she was happy with how things were progressing. She just did not have that need to be in the group and to be sharing and getting feedback, and just very much I'm walking to the beat of my own drum here.
Yeah. I think about my ex-husband when, you know, in the days where you had to wear suits and ties to work, but his ties were never the standard tie. You know, that was his little piece of individualism. And they might have the funny sock as well. I don't know when your husband, when he was working too, if he was a bit like that. The quirky, like little quirky pieces.
Something a little bit unusual. When I first met Dan, he had bright blue and bright red round plastic glasses. Those were the first things that I actually said have to exit stage left. But I appreciated what he was trying to do with those. So we replaced them with, you know, we managed to, even back then before, you know, style types was even existed, I knew there had to be something quirky and a little bit different. And it doesn't have to be a big statement piece. And in fact, it almost doesn't even need to be something that anybody else even notices. It's a personal relationship to this, like, I know about this, that this is something a bit different, a bit nifty.
Yeah, a little bit nifty, a little bit fun. I mean, I certainly think I noticed with my ex-husband, he's all about fun. There's a, you know, great, you know, fun is something really important. Loves playing with, you know, like when the kids are young, it's always very physical, fun play.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally.
All that sort of thing. And in fact, he's now written books about, you know, being a fun dad.
Oh, really? Well, there you go.
So,
yeah.
It'd be a fun dad. I'm going, it was a very ISTP dad, but it wouldn't be every dad.
Well, you know, this is the thing. There is no perfect way of being. There's just our way of being. And the journey of type, you know, the journey of individuation is it starts with recognizing self, recognizing innate preference, and then that others are different. But that's not the end of the journey. And sadly, that's where a lot of people end their journey, and they don't realize that, what Carl Jung identified was a pathway of individuation, which is about growth and about understanding ego development and how we can mature and, come into ourselves more fully. And that also includes how our relationships with other people are positively impacted by that. So, all of that is part of the type journey as well. And certainly that applies to style types. On our online program, we have some of our members saying, I just feel like I'm becoming more and more myself. And what I read into that is, I am accepting more and more, because you already were that. It's the awareness of it and the embracing of it. And that also means if I'm hanging on to this, then I'm not hanging on to that. And so it allows us to let go of some things as well. I just think that's incredibly powerful.
It's very fascinating. And I think a lot of it too is that there's a lot of messaging we've had, should have, would have, could have sort of stuff, particularly and around style and image and personal presentation, all that sort of stuff. There's a lot of messaging that we get. And I think that's where, when it's that coming to self, going, I don't have to try and be like somebody else anymore. And I think that's that joy of type, is to go, I can just be me, and me is perfectly fine. And in fact, me is great.
Exactly. And my approach to style is also great. If you've worked in a corporate world or any kind of organizational setting that has requirements around how you dress or how you look, and of course a lot of those things have changed over the years, and if you are one of the more individualistic style types, you can have had this feeling of chafing, that it's been constricting or binding in some way. And to be able to drop a lot of that and say, I get to choose how I interact with my style. And our basic principle is style always matters. It's always a factor in some way or another, but how you employ it is so deeply individual, and it's related to your style type.
Yeah. So thanks for watching today. We'll be back again soon with another type, chatting about another type. Always love your questions. Happy to get back to them afterwards if you watch this at a later time. And of course, if you don't know your type, you can come to our 16styletypes.com website and find your type and get your style type report as part of that, which gives you a really great insight into your approach to style, what we call your style essence. And how, you work, and how often that is different from other people, because that's one of those things that we can make assumptions when we think that, well, doesn't everybody do it this way? But really, we do it our own way, because that's the way we know. But this is where sometimes I think it's that coming home to self and going, well, that's okay. But also becoming a little bit aware of things like blind spots and challenges, where we can make some improvements, as well as what our strengths are, and actually starting to appreciate the strengths. I think that's incredibly valuable. That's one of the things we've noticed in our programs, is that when people actually start to accept and even go, I didn't realize it was a strength because it's so natural, I don't see it as a strength, and to realize that other people can't do what you can do. And I think that's where, when you learn what your superpowers are, whether you can take it from style and then you can apply it to all other aspects of your life, and that's going to give you incredible happiness in some way.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very empowering on a personal level. Yeah.
So thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you again soon. Bye for now.